Halfland, an ahistorical prehistory. Part 12. The Mouse, the Vixen, and a Big Fish. In year 111 of the Common Reckoning, with the purge pox rampaging throughout her realm, Asta, the queen of the dwarves of the Dark Hills, learned that her forces had been shattered at the Battle of Throsted, and that Katla and her religious fanatics were marching on the hill-hold. Asta and her mother Yrsa debated their best course of action. Yrsa's view was uncompromising. As she put it, "When a mouse runs into the kitchen, you do not let it upset you. No, you take a skillet and crush it with one well-directed blow." "That is true," replied Asta, "but if the mouse sidesteps the blow and the skillet shatters on the flagstones, a sensible scullery maid will not stand her ground and wait for the mouse to run up her skirts. She will go to the cupboard and get a larger skillet." "That is all very well for a scullery maid," snapped Yrsa, "but you are a queen, and a queen should not flee from danger." "Neither should a queen allow herself to be cornered and violated by a mouse," Asta retorted. "I do not have enough dwarves to garrison the hill-hold, and, even if I did, the purge pox has left the fields unharvested and the hill-hold unprovisioned. A queen's strength is in her subjects. I will not sit here undefended and unsupplied and allow Katla and her fanatics to decide my fate. I will instead go to my people and ask them to help me to fight. And if they will not do so, well, then I am no queen at all." Although the larders of the hill-hold were empty, the armories were not. Asta ordered her few remaining fighting dwarves to load all the arms and armour onto carts. As Katla approached from the south, Asta headed east into the Dark Hills. Katla thus entered the hill-hold unopposed. She declared herself the priestess queen, and her 1-year-old son Otkill the true king of all the dwarves, and sent out bands of her followers into the land to demand that the people make harvest offerings to the gods. But the crops had rotted in the fields as the purge pox raged, and the people were starving. Katla's followers then demanded offerings of gold, but the dwarves saw no benefit in thus parting with their gold, and voluntary contributions were not forthcoming. Katla's followers then proclaimed that non-payment of these contributions was an act of sacrilege against the priestess queen, and that those who thus insulted the gods would forfeit their lives. And then the killing began. Meanwhile, Asta had set up her base of operations in the hills to the south of the great mountain that the dwarves called Lordsgrave. Here there were many mines, worked by convicts. Asta set these convicts to work in chain gangs in the fields, reaping what of the harvest could still be rescued, and she called all the free dwarves of the Dark Hills to her banner. Many of them came. Asta fed them and armed them and waited. Katla's position became increasingly desperate. She had no food to feed to her followers, and, faced with a choice of death or taxes, the people were turning against her. She gathered her adherents around her and marched against Asta. This was what Asta had been waiting for. She mustered the warriors she had armed, donned a mail coat, and, bearing an axe and shield, herself led them to meet Katla's host. Yrsa did not approve of this. As she put it, "A lady's strength is not in her arm, but in her tongue. When she wants water with which to wash her hair, she does not herself go to the well and draw it. Only a crazy, lonely woman would do so. No, she has the water drawn for her. Indeed, if she is both wise and skilful, not only is the water drawn for her, but it is warmed at the fire before it is brought to her, and her people are delighted and proud to do this for her. You have convinced the people that they wish to fight for you, and so you yourself do not need to fight. There are many dwarfs who would gladly lead your army to war, dwarfs who are practiced in fighting and leading warriors. You have no experience of these things. But Asta defied her mother. You speak the truth, she said, but if this battle is lost, then so is my realm, and so am I. There will be nothing left to fight with or to fight for. I will not wait helplessly behind while my fate is decided by others. No, I will lead my people to battle and decide my own fate. I am the queen, and I have spoken, and so it will be. The armies met at the foot of Lordsgrave. The battle was ferocious and bloody. Neither side gave any quarter, but Asta triumphed. Katla was killed, her army was destroyed, and following the battle, her remaining followers, including all the women and children, were hunted down. Many were executed, and the remainder were sent to the mines. Katla had 2 baby children, Otkel, who was but 1 year old, and his still younger brother Orin. Katla's widowed sister-in-law Halberta requested that these 2 orphans be delivered into her care. Asta granted this request, and neither Otkel nor Orin was ever heard of again. Asta returned to the Hillhold. By the end of the year, the purge pox had run its course. Over the following year, Asta restored law and order throughout her lands. And then, in the 113th year of the Common Reckoning, encouraged by her mother, she turned her attention southward to Unnascrag. At that time, Unnascrag was ruled by the Lady Ingvild. She did not accept Asta as the queen of the dwarves of the Dark Hills, declaring that her son, Halvard, was the rightful king. And Halvard based himself at Unnascrag, seeking to raise an army from his mother's subjects, intending to make good this claim. As Ursa observed to Asta, if, in the winter, a vixen and her cub build a den in your fields, you do not leave them be. If you do so, then in the springtime they will kill all of your newborn lambs. No, you dig up their lair and set your dogs on them. Asta gathered her fighting dwarves, placed herself at their head, and marched them south. Halvard marched his army forth to meet them, and a battle was fought at Harby Hill. Asta won the victory, and, even as his troops were being cut down, Halvard fled the field without striking a single blow. Widespread dwarvish opinion regarded this as a contemptible act of cowardice on Halvard's part, and, as a result, the majority of his supporters abandoned his cause, adopting the view, as commonly expressed at the time, that it was better to be ruled by a maid than by a milksop. And so it was that the leading dwarves of Unnascrag all swore fealty to Queen Asta. She thus became the undisputed ruler of a realm stretching from Unnascrag to the Hillhold and eastward beyond the river Ravenshead. Ingvild and Halvard fled to the Geitsmark, where they dwelt in ignominy. Ingvild found the disgrace of her son particularly hard to bear. Her spirit was broken, and she died the following year. In the 121st year of the Common Reckoning, Ranveig, the queen of the Geitsmark, died. Her crown passed to her eldest son, Harni. That same year, also saw the death of Godric, the king of the Skeldings. Once more the captains of the Skeldings assembled in the great hall of Skeld to decide who should become their king. The two most powerful men in the kingdom were Gunlaf, who was Godric's eldest son and had inherited his lands, and Aldric, who was the warden of Overwater. Godric had long indicated that he wished Gunlaf to succeed him to the throne, and many of the captains supported Gunlaf's claim. There was less support among the captains for Aldric, but although they were not captains, the majority of the Skelding nobility to the north of the Silver Stream owed their position and lands to Aldric. Thus, while he did not have the votes to be elected as king, he could raise an army capable of winning him that title by force. And, faced with the alternative of voting for Aldric or starting a civil war, it is possible that many of the captains would have reconsidered their position and voted for Aldric. In the event, this choice was not forced upon them. Aldric and Gunlaf had a private conference, at which Aldric suggested that he would support Gunlaf in his bid for the throne, on the condition that, once he was crowned, Gunlaf would confirm Aldric as warden of Overwater, and make that title hereditary, so that it would pass to Aldric's descendants. It appears that there was some negotiation, and there is still debate about what exactly Gunlaf promised to Aldric. But Aldric did announce that he had no desire to be king, and the captains bestowed that title upon Gunlaf. Gunlaf's first act as king was to receive the homage of the captains, each of whom in turn knelt before him and swore an oath of loyalty to him. And, after Aldric had made this oath, Gunlaf bade him stand, and embraced him, and in front of the entire assembly Gunlaf declared that Aldric was his right hand and the lifelong warden of Overwater. But he said no more than this. A third reign also came to an end in the 121st year of the Common Reckoning. Altes had ruled the city of New Lixia for 17 peaceful and prosperous years. One bright and sunny morning, as the summer drew to its close, Altes and his eldest son, Abbas, boarded the royal galley and set out on a pleasure trip. Although the weather remained fair, they did not return as expected that evening, nor the next day, nor indeed the day after that. By now, the disappearance of the king and his heir was being discussed all over the city. A crowd gathered round the royal palace, and wild rumours started to circulate, with some claiming that Altes and Abbas had been kidnapped or murdered. Now, the great uncle of Altes was Alberos Dogface, the ruler of Dogopolis, who had a daughter named Iomene, who was married to a ship owner of Dogopolis called Adrastos, whose ships carried much trade between Dogopolis and New Lixia. Adrastos often came to New Lixia in order to oversee this business, and his wife would accompany him. And, as was only natural, when she was in New Lixia, Iomene would call upon Altes. After all, he was her cousin, once removed. As a result of these visits, Iomene became a great friend of Lyra, who was the wife of Altes. It so happened that, at the time Altes disappeared, Iomene and Adrastos were staying at the royal palace, and, as the crowd around the royal palace increased and the clamour grew ever louder, Lyra turned to them for support. Adrastos' first concern was that things might take an unpleasant turn. A couple of his ships were in the harbour, and he sent instructions to the captains of those ships that they should send the best fighting men among the crews to the palace, where he used the contents of the royal armouries to equip them, thus forming an improvised bodyguard for Lyra. Now, not all of the inhabitants of New Lixia were hanging around the palace gossiping. Some of them had to earn a living. One of these was a fisherman named Padaris. At dawn that morning Padaris had taken his small boat out to sea, baited his line, and cast it into the water. And the bait was taken. For 2 hours Padaris wrestled with an unseen adversary. After 2 more hours he had brought it to the surface alongside his boat, and he could see that he had hooked a very big fish. And after another 2 hours of struggle the fish was dead and aboard the boat, and Padaris was heading back to shore. Padaris unloaded his catch upon the new Lixian quayside, and determined to cut it into steaks there and then to sell at the harbour fish market and complete a good day's work. But when he cut the fish open, he found in its stomach a human leg, hosed in the finest cloth, and on the foot of that leg was an exquisitely tooled leather boot, and on that boot was embossed and embroidered the royal crest. This discovery caused considerable excitement. A throng soon gathered and swept Padaris up to the palace, where he exhibited the leg to the crowd before the palace. There was much wailing and woe. Lyra heard the lamentations outside and emerged into the daylight, flanked by Adrastos sailors. The leg was presented to her. She identified it as that of her son, and withdrew with it, weeping copiously, back into the palace. And now some members of the crowd started to cry out that this was a plot by the Dogopolitans to seize control of New Lixia, that Adrastos had arranged for his men to board the royal galley and slay Altes and Abbas and all their entourage, that the bodies had been thrown into the sea and the royal galley sunk to hide the evidence of the murders, and that Adrastos had now seized the palace, and that the lives of Lyra and Lycoris, who was Abbas' younger brother, were in peril. A mob surged forward, beating at the palace doors. Lyra sat crumpled on the floor, clutching her son's leg to her breast, silently rocking to and fro. Adrastos urged her to flee. She showed no sign that she had heard him. The panels of the doors started to split, and the door bolts were being wrenched from their settings. The crowd outside chanted Lycoris' name, demanding that he be delivered to them. Adrastos spoke to Iomene. "We must leave now," he said. "We cannot help those who will not help themselves." He turned to Lycoris, a pale-faced, slightly built youth of 12, who was standing off to the side, silent and wide-eyed. "You can come with us," he said. "We will protect you." Lycoris did not answer, but ran to his mother's side, clinging to her. Adrastos shrugged. He took his wife by the hand and led her from the room, followed by his sailors. A few seconds later the doors gave way, and the mob burst into the palace. Seeing that Lycoris was unharmed, they gave a great cheer and swept him up, raising him onto their shoulders and bearing him to the agora, where they acclaimed him as king and swore to obey him, and he swore to rule in accordance with the laws. Adrastos and Iomene fled to the harbour, pursued by an angry crowd who hurled abuse and projectiles at them. But no blows were struck. The crowd was reluctant to get too close to Adrastos' men, who were burly and well armed, and so Adrastos and his party were able to embark upon their ships and sail for Dogopolis with their physical integrity, if not their dignity, intact. And all this time Lyra sat alone and wept for her dead husband and son.